Okay, so normally for a Life Matters I would show some photos from recent travel that I've done or share some useless random facts, but given that I'm not allowed to travel, so yeah, I thought an entirely COVID appropriate Life Matters theme would be to make something in the kitchen. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you my own recipe for apple bread, apple fruit bread. It's a pretty simple one, a few things that you need up front, obviously some flour, and there's lots, sidebar note, there's lots of different types of flour you can buy. The better flour for bread making is the ones that are titled baker's flour or strong flour, although to be fair, we've bought the wrong one a couple of times, doesn't seem to make a massive difference, so I wouldn't lose too much sleep over it. Some brown sugar, oil, I like olive oil, you'll need some yeast. There's also different types of yeast, but I've just got Edmonds active yeast because that's what happened to be in Countdown. A couple of apples, a lemon, some salt, and you'll need some measuring cups, etc. So a measuring device, some measuring spoons, peeler for your apple, a grater for your apple, and then some fruit, some dried fruit. Now you can use different types of dried fruit as well, I think, but we're pretty big fans of cranberries here, so we've got a fair few cranberries crammed into the cup measure there. And you'll need a bowl for mixing your bread in. This one's a bit special to me. This was my mummy's bowl for bread making. Was she a good bread maker? No, not particularly, but she had a fantastic bowl and I inherited it, so hopefully I won't drop it and break it because I'm kind of a little emotionally attached to this bowl. Okay, so here's what we need to do. The first thing is we've got to get the yeast rising. So first part of the recipe is we need about 300 mils of liquid, and it needs to be warm. The way I do this is I put about 150 mils of milk into a bowl. Hang on a sec. There might have been a little bit more, about 200. That's close enough. And then I just top it up to the 300 mils with boiling water to get it to about the right temperature. So stand by, and the magic of video. I did wash my hands before I did this, which is the way I can check if the temperature is right. You need the milk and water to be warm, so warm that you can just feel it's warm to your finger. To be honest, anywhere around body temperature is fine, but you just need it warm enough for the yeast to rise. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put some sugar in with the milk. So this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of sugar. I like brown sugar in fruit bread because it gives it a kind of a nice flavour. So I'll put a couple of tablespoons of sugar in there, and then some yeast. I think this recipe calls for half a tablespoon of yeast. So because of the extra sugar in it, you do need probably more more yeast than you would put in normal bread, but I find about half a tablespoon is about right. So we'll drop that in there, give that a little stir. And that's our nice yeast and sugar mixture. And then we're just going to let that stand. So that's actually just going to sit on the side for probably about 3 or 4 minutes until it starts to get foamy. I'll show you what that looks like a bit later. While that's happening, we'll get the rest of the dry ingredients ready. So the recipe calls for about 2.5 cups to 3 cups of flour. And I will say that's a little bit of a guide because I really don't measure the flour exactly. I tend to keep putting it in until the dough feels right. But to start with, 1.5 cups of flour or thereabouts would be about right. Get the flour in there. Then we'll add salt. So salt-wise, we need about a teaspoon of salt. So a teaspoon of salt in there. And then we need some oil, and about a tablespoon of oil goes in. Again, like I said before, I like to use olive oil. Pop that in there, and then give that a good mix. So essentially we need to make sure that the oil is combined with the flour and not kind of clumping up. So we just give that a really good mix, pressing the oil into the flour. and mixing up the salt. Really important that the salt's distributed nice and evenly through the flour, because the salt will kill the yeast if it comes into contact with it. So we only want we want to make sure that the flour is really well distributed into in with the salt and the oil as well. It's good that it's nice and well distributed as well. So give that a good mix. Next thing that we're going to add into that is the apple. So I've got 2 apples here. Now what I tend to do with this is I will grate one and I'll chop one into pieces. So I'm going to first peel the apples and then chop them up. So I'll show you that when that's done. Okay, so I've chopped up the apple reasonably fine, and I've grated the apple, and I've also grated the zest of the lemon. So 1 zest of lemon and 1 grated apple in there, and 1 chopped up apple. So we're going to add this back to the flour mixture. So we put all the grated apple in there. We'll put the chopped up apple in there, and failed to mention before, some cinnamon. So a generous sprinkling of cinnamon. I have no idea what the actual quantity is. It's probably about 1/2 teaspoon, but it's about that much. It works. And then we're going to mix all of this in with the flour. Looks a little bit messy, but it works. We're just going to have it generally distributed through the flour. And then I promised I would show you the yeast, what it looks like after it's been sitting. And the yeast has been sitting now for probably about 5 or 10 minutes. And you can see it's all gone foamy on top, which is perfect. That means the yeast is growing and doing its thing. So we're just gonna quickly stir that yeast back into the liquid. This is great. This is the start of the process of bread rising has already taken place. Technically, bulk fermentation time is already 10 minutes in or something. So here we go. We're going to add that into the dry ingredients, and just generally give this a good stir so that it'll be a nice sloppy mixture. And here is kind of where the fun starts. So now we're going to be adding back flour into this recipe until it gets to a consistency of dough. So I'm just going to grab the flour back again and start adding that back in and show you a little bit more about that. Okay, so the recipe basically is just to keep adding flour gradually adding flour and mixing it in until you've got a dough. And as I said initially, this will have between 2.5 and 3 cups of flour in total. But depending on the humidity of the day and a whole bunch of other factors and how much moisture there was in the apple that you added, I can't really tell you exactly how much flour you put in. You just keep putting it in until it's the right amount. And it will start to get a little bit messy and a little bit sticky. This is not the easiest bread recipe to knead, but we'll stick with it. It'll get there. I need a little bit more flour in there still by the look of that. Here we go. Now it's starting to look a little bit more sticky, a little bit more like a dough. Now, if you have an electric stand mixer, like a nice KitchenAid or a Kenwood Chef or something, this would be dramatically easier. But since I'm a bit too tight to go and buy one, I'm still old school and mixing it up by hand. So we're pretty much getting to that point where I'm going to have to get my hands dirty and get into it. I can tell it's not going to last too much longer. With the fork, it's going to get a bit heavy. All right, so here's my little hack for this. Get a little bit of flour, put it around the bowl, put some flour on my hand, and then start to knead this. And you can knead it in the bowl for as long as you can, but generally I find I like to get it out on the bench fairly soon. So we get a little bit of flour on the bench and get this out of the bowl and onto the bench. And I'm not going to bore you with the full process of this, but what we're going to do is just continually knead it up, mix it up, keep adding flour to the bench, and eventually it's going to look like a ball of dough. I may not bore you with the whole piece. Let's see how we go. Alright, so eventually you're going to have kneaded it up. It's going to turn into this nice soft dough. Actually, to be fair, I think I completely underestimated the amount of flour that needed to go into that because of the amount of moisture in the apple, etc. But it's a nice dough that's left. So now we need to leave that to sit and rise. There's a few different ways you can do that. If you've got a nice warm house, nice spot in the sun somewhere, you can cover it with a cloth and stick it in there. If you've got a hot water cupboard, or you can stick it on the back of the fridge, a nice warm place. My personal hack is to put it in the oven. Don't turn the oven on, obviously, but just stick it in the oven and put it in the top shelf, and then in the bottom shelf, I just fill up a tray with hot water and stick it underneath there, and that'll create a nice humid environment. And we'll leave it in there for about an hour or until it's doubled in size. I'll show you what that looks like when we come back. Okay, so the dough is out of the oven and it is enormous. Actually, I left it for about 90 minutes because I got carried away doing something else. So it is huge, look at this. So anyway, next step is we're gonna get the fruit into it. So we're gonna get it out of the thing. You see, look at that. It's just beautifully risen up and stretchy and holy. It's a magnificent piece of dough. Very, very happy with that. Now, I could have put the fruit into it when I was originally making the dough. I just tend to find that it's really annoying kneading the dough with all the fruit in it. So this may be a terrible way to do it, but it works for me. So I get the fruit, and there's a lot of it. I say about 1 cup of fruit, but because I like the dried fruit in it so much, I cram it down into the cup and overfill it because there is a heap of it in there. And all I do is just flour up the bench, flatten it out a little bit, and then start to roll and knead the fruit into it. So a little bit of flour on the bench so that it doesn't stick. Because this has got a bit of sugar in this dough, it is a little bit sticky, but not too bad. So then I just give it a little bit of a knead. And to be fair, all you really would have to do if you wanted to is knead this up a little bit, drop it into a container and get it ready to bake. But I have one more little trick that I like to do just because I think it's kind of fun. And that is, once I've got it kneaded, I like to make a particular shape out of it. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so as you saw, I just platted that up into a little bit of an interesting shape. Drop it into a bread pan that's been got lined with paper, and then we'll just pop that back into the oven. I just put the little tray of hot water underneath it again, and it can sit in there again for probably about another 60 minutes until it's doubled in size, and I'll show you that before we just bake it. Okay, so bread has risen extraordinarily a lot, so it's definitely doubled in size. Probably just took about 45 minutes maybe. So we're going to drop that in the oven. Oven is heated to 200 degrees. It's not on fan bake, it's on just regular bake because the fan bake will dry it out of it. And here is my little hack. If you like crusty bread, when you're baking bread and you don't have one of those super flash steam ovens, a few cubes of ice in the bottom of the oven, that'll steam up and it'll make that nice crusty surface on the bread. Okay, it's been in the oven for 40 minutes, so time to get it out. I think we're ready to go. Looks good. So I'll just sounds reassuringly cooked. Grew up a little bit too large, and for the last final little step is just just finishes it off nicely. A couple of little teaspoons of brown sugar in about a tablespoon of boiling water, and just brush the top with that while it's still hot out of the oven. And it'll just give it a nice glaze and make that crust nice and soft and sweet. And that's it. Next time you see this, I'll be eating it. So that was just a simple apple and cranberry fruit bread. You can modify that recipe to make all kinds of different other varieties of bread. Happy to send some recipes out to anyone who's got some idea, wants some ideas. I don't have any moral to the story, just bless you and your families wherever you are. Hope you're staying safe, keeping well, and enjoying time with the people you love. Thanks for watching.